Hello and welcome to this tutorial / workshop on using the Mechanim system inside of Unity 3D. For those who are uninitiated thus far, Mechanim is a state machine control system. It actually uses state machines to control animations and can be used to control events, but that's a topic for another day. Today we're just going to concentrate on very basics. We'll not be using any scripts. We're just going to use Playmaker to control which animation is playing inside of our or on our character. So as we can see here, this is the project that we have done previously in class. This for those who are watching this that are not in my class, this is just going to be used for a very basic demonstration. I'll hit play, and we can see our little guy down here, and he has a very basic idle animation. He just kind of breathes there or whatever. And once I press up, he animates. If I press to the left, he kind of shuffles to the left. Press up again, and he has a backwards animation too. Not very good. That should probably be tweaked. It looks like he's moonwalking. Michael Jackson's alive. But anyway, with this still playing down here, let's take a look at the Playmaker for this guy. So we have something here called GetAxis. Now GetAxis is a simple function inside of Unity, and it essentially listens. It listens for this horizontal axis to be changed. Well, what is an axis? Well, if we go into our project settings under Edit, Project Settings, Input, here we can see that there are a total of 18 axes predetermined with Unity, and essentially it's going to be one of two values. -1, well no, that's not true, between two values, -1 or 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that function. Let's take a look at what the GetAxis function does. We can see that this was defined horizontal and vertical, and I'll open up the settings again, and it's defined by the left key, the right key. So this is the negative button. Let me open up my mouse pose. The horizontal axis, and here's the name, and you can change the name if you so desire. Just press 222 and you'll see that it does change here. Okay. And the only thing that this negative value and positive value indicate is what button do you want me to press to make GetAxis return a -1 or up to a -1. And I'll get to that in a moment too. Positive button is which button do you want me to put to assign to return a +1 value. Now obviously if left and right are not being pressed, the value will be 0. Okay, 0 is the dead zone. 0 means no one is pressing any buttons, nothing is happening. Now we do have an alternate button as well. Alternate negative button is A, alternate positive button is D, and it does the same thing. Alright, so what does this function actually do? Well, let's go take a look. I'm inside of the Unity scripting reference, and you can look up any function that you'll find inside of Playmaker. You will find it inside of the reference. So let's go ahead, GetAxis. Alright, input GetAxis. Input simply indicates the class that this function is derived from. Inside of Unity, you have lots of different classes, and they all derive from mono behavior is the main class for the entire system. Now, all this really doesn't matter. The only thing that we really are concentrating on is this. Any of these functions, GetAxis, or any of these that derive from the input class, we can just call them automatically anywhere inside this, inside the scene, inside the game. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this GetAxis function. All right, we can see here that it's a public method or function that we can call anywhere. Static means we can't change it. It just stays the way it is. Float is the return type for this. GetAxis, name of the function, and string is the type of this parameter that we pass to this function. So in layman's terms, we call GetAxis, and inside of the parentheses we indicate which function we're trying to get, and we would use a string, so it would be quote horizontal end quote to get the horizontal axis. Alright, so it says returns the value of the virtual axis identified by axis name. So here's a virtual axis, it gets returned. The value will be in the range -1 to 1 for keyboard and joystick input. If the axis is set up to be a delta mouse movement, the delta mouse is multiplied by the axis sensitivity and not the range, and the range is not -1, 1. Now, all of this stuff doesn't matter because we're not going to worry about any kind of mouse movement for now. Now, we can see some examples here in code, and right now it's in C#. We can switch it to JavaScript or whatever. It really doesn't matter because we're not going to be using any of it in the course. We're going to be using Playmaker. But it is of note that we actually need to have, inside of Playmaker, we need to have a variable to hold whatever this is. Now I'm going to have a quick demonstration here using a different scene so we can see exactly what we're talking about here. Okay, so I'm going to open up this scene, GetAxis demo, and this is simply, let's look at the Playmaker state machine that I have set up, and the only thing I have is a GetAxis, and I'm going to get the vertical axis, and it says multiplier, so you can take whatever you get here, -1, 1, and you can multiply it by a certain value. Right now we don't really need that. I'm just going to leave the multiplier at 1. And if you don't know why you would use that, it's okay. It'll probably become more clear to you in time. Now, store means I must have, and I can just leave this at none, and it's going to be red. It's going to say this is a required field. I need to have somewhere to store this. I need a variable to store it. So inside of Playmaker, we go to the Variables tab in here, and don't worry about the string. This is something that I have to use to actually make it come up on the screen. I need to have somewhere to store this value. And, well, okay, well, how do we do that? Well, we make a variable. Okay, well, so I make a new variable. I say new variable. And then we have variable type. And if we look at this, there's lots of different types that we could store information. We could use an integer, a boolean, we could use a game object, a string. So how do we know which one to actually choose? Well, if we look back over here, it tells us for this function, you're going to store it. The return type is going to be a float, so this is the type that the variable needs to be. If we're going to store a value between -1 and 1 and 0.5 and 0.7 and -0.3 and all of the numbers in between are okay, then we need to use a float. A float is any number that has a decimal point and up to a certain amount of digits. For our purposes, float will suffice just fine for most things. We're not going to worry about doubles. Okay, we're just going to use floats. So we do know that the variable type here is going to be float. So this is the type the variable is going to be. Alright, now I already have one set up, and it's vFloat. vFloat, its initial value is 0. Tooltip, I don't have anything here, and I can store something here if I want, where we will store the vertical float return of GetAxis. Alright. So I can use vFloat. Oh, that's how it works. It's just a hover. So that's a lot of work for a hover, but whatever. Alright, and so we're going to do this every frame. Now every frame means that this is going to constantly do this all the time until it actually would switch to another state. Now we're not switching to another state in this example. We're simply going to, whatever I press, I'm going to store it in this variable. Now this stuff here, and we'll get to this at a later date, but the only thing that this is doing is taking whatever this variable is, the float that I got here, converting it to a string so that I can display it on the screen, and we'll get to it later. The only thing you need to worry about right now is that every frame we're going to listen for one of the keys that is defined by the vertical axis inside of the input. So we're going to listen for either the up key, the down key, the S key, or the W key. Okay? And when we actually get one of those values, we store it in a variable called, I can't remember the name of it now, vFloat. And then we're going to take vFloat and display it to the screen. So let's hit play and see what happens. So right now it just says 0.00 because I'm not pressing anything on the keyboard. Now I'm going to press W. And you can see that it slowly moves, well not slowly, but quickly moves its way up to +1. So that's what this variable now holds. It holds the value 1. Okay, and every frame it's going to be changing depending on what the current axis is actually returning. Now if I press the S key, we get -1. So this is the negative return value. So the negative button. Okay, you have the positive button, the negative button. Now I'll press the up key. Same thing, no different. Just like that. Alright? So this GetAxis function is useful because we can listen for any keys. Now we can also use it to listen for any controller input. We can, we can use it for input in that regard. Now we can also use this later on if we're going to use a virtual controller. For example, if you want to have a controller on screen for mobile devices. So once we get this information, what we can do is we can watch this variable and do something if it's a certain value. So if this vFloat is a certain value, we can make it change states, something like that. Now an example of this would be found in the completed scene that we did in class. Now or not in class, but as the previous tutorial. If we take a look at this guy, and we look at his states, that's fine, just edit the instance. We look here and we see we have variables H and V. H is going to be used to hold the horizontal GetAxis data, and V will be used for the vertical one. Now if we look at our state, I can see here that we have a GetAxis running every frame horizontal, and we're storing that in the age variable. We have a GetAxis vertical, and let me delete these, we don't use them, it might just confuse people, so we'll get rid of them. So we have the vertical one, we store it in the V variable. And we'll get back to the animator float in a moment, well, in a few moments. The float compare is what I was talking about previously. We're looking at the V variable, and we're comparing it to whatever float 2 is. Now float 2, and you can always click the help on this, it will tell you float compare sends events based on the comparison of two floats. Float 1 is the first float, float 2 is the second float. Tolerance is, how close we can get before we actually consider it to be different. What do we do if these two floats are equal to each other? What do we do if this float is less than the second float? And what do we do if the first float is greater than the second float? And again, that's just the little help button. All right, so if you ever look at one of these functions, one of these actions as they're called in Playmaker, and you don't really know what it does and you want to see the documentation, just click the little help book and it will take you to that site. Now here we have a float 1v, it's compared to 0, and if it's equal, so if v is equal to 0, do nothing. And this makes sense. If it's in idle, so that means I'm not pressing any buttons, it shouldn't do anything. It should just stay here and keep idling and not move. Okay? Now, if float compare is, so v is less than 0, I should go to the run function, not the run event, and you can see here run moves into move forward. Okay? Now, the focus of this isn't really to go into Playmaker and explain this. What I just want to emphasize here is that this first state in Playmaker, and these other states as well, because these are essentially just copies of the other one, but they do translates, they move and rotate, okay? They move this object. But what this is going to do is it's going to listen for this and store it in this. Depending on what this is, it can send data or make events change, and everything's good. But what if we wanted to take that data and instead of just doing movement, and let's do this. Let's do a new scene. Let's go into our scene view, and let's create a plane. Now this plane, I'm going to enlarge it here, and I'll take a basic material, or I'll just grab one of the ones I already have, and I'll apply it. Alright, and I'll take the camera, align it with the view so I can see what I'm looking at. I'll create a cube and move it up, maybe like so. Alright, and we want it like this. Alright, so let's say, for example, we want to use Playmaker and we want to move this cube. So let's go and do a Playmaker. Yeah, be quiet, go away. Let's add an FSM, and for this cube, it's going to be really simple. I'm going to do GetAxis, 2 of them. I'm going to get horizontal. vertical. And obviously for store, I do need some place to store this, so let's click new variable. And let's call this vert float. And make sure that's correct, okay? And this one we'll do a new variable, and ori float. Alright, so I have two variables. It's going to store these values in. And if I hit play, obviously nothing's going to happen. Because although I am getting this data, although I am getting these two axes, and I am pressing buttons, nothing is going on because I'm not really doing anything with this data. So let's take the physics engine and let's use the transform up here and some of the functions built into the transform class, and let's go ahead and do something with this data. So let's do an action, and let's say we're going to transform and see what we get for transform. And you can see that once we type in transform, we get lots of different things, okay? And none of these are really what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'll just leave this blank and go through here and find some of the different categories of things we can do. Now logic is a good one because we can do, this is where we could use any kind of conditional expressions or relational operators and check and see if there's an integer change, do one of two things or three things. Int switch can go as many things as you want. We can do 5, 10, 20 different things depending on what the value of an integer is. Float changed, float compare, this is the one that I've already used. And let's go ahead and do float compare. Now we could make this actually go into another event, and let's say I'm going to make move forward. And move forward is going to lead into over here. Now what events are the little arrows that lead into one state or another. But again, this really isn't about Playmaker, this is about something else that I'm building to. And let's say that move forward is going to go to this state, and over here you can type in literal values, but you don't need to. You can use variables. So if vertical float, vert float, is greater than 0, we go to move forward. And we'll just leave move forward blank for now. So let's hit play and see what happens. So right now we're getting axis, getting the horizontal, we're getting the vertical, and oh wait, I gotta restart this. I gotta make sure that this is run every frame because I'm always going to be looking for this to be changed. If I don't have this checked, that means it only runs one time. So let's hit play again. Okay, so we have GetAxis. Right now, if vertical float is greater than move forward, then we should change to this other state. Now right now I'm not pressing anything, so we haven't changed. But if I press up, you'll see that it does switch over to this other state. So we can have different functionality go into this. And we can have different things happen depending on what the input is. And we don't just have to use GetAxis. We can also use other ones. Say for example, getButton. Now getButton, we can use these, or getMouseButton. Let's say for getMouseButton. For the left button, where should we store this? Well, new value, mouse button. Okay. So we can get this mouse button and see whatever it is. Look over here and see what kind of function that is. It's a Boolean, so it's true or false. And the same type of thing, we can do that over here too. We can say bool. Let's see, bool tests. The bool will test is mouse button down. So this is, if it's true, we're going to go to move forward. If it's false, we don't do anything. So if I click something, if I click the mouse button down, the left mouse button, which is defined here, if I click something, it's going to switch into this state. I'll hit play. Right now, nothing is true. I haven't clicked anything. As soon as I left mouse click the button, or anywhere inside of the scene, you'll see that it does switch to the other state. Now, we can use this now. We can make some kind of functionality happen. So let's say whenever I click, or whenever I press the up arrow, or the W key, or the positive of the vertical axis, let's say I want to move this cube. So here I can just go ahead and look for move. Now, upon first look, we want to look at this and it says controller move or controller simple move, and our first thought is, hey, this will work. And this will work, but not for the setup we currently have. This is for game controller, character controllers. Okay, and we're not using a character controller for this guy. We just have a simple transform and a simple box collider. So we're not going to use that. Let's get rid of whatever that was. So the function we're going to use is inside of the transform class. And this function is called translate. Now translate means to move something in the X, Y, or Z axis. Alright, it uses a vector3 variable and X, Y, Z components. It just means that it moves something. That's what translate means. It means move. So we use translate. And where are we going to move it? Well, let's say we're going to move it in the Z direction. And let's say 1 every frame. That's it. We're going to move this in the one direction every frame inside of this functionality, inside of this state. Alright? So I hit play. And right now nothing is happening because I didn't click anything. So let me press the button. And now it starts moving in the Y direction, so the blue, 1 unit every frame. You can see it slowly keeps moving. Obviously the problem here is I'm stuck in this state. I can't get back to the other state. Alright, so to fix that, you can add another state, for example finished, and loop it back. Now, this is all well and good for controlling the physics system, you know, making transforms, or you know, maybe we don't want to actually do a translate. Maybe instead of that we want to do a rotate. We do the same type of thing. We can make this rotate as soon as we click the button. Actually, I need to change that to per second. It doesn't really matter. So as soon as I click, now it starts to rotate very slowly but surely. Now obviously inside of here I can set this to go faster. To make it go faster, what you do is use these multipliers. Okay? Or if you're setting it to be the the value that the function would actually return. I can just put 20, for example, and hit play, and now when I click, it's going to go 20. And you can see the rotation values here. So, like I was saying, that's all well and good if we want to use the physics system, and the next section of the course reading will talk about this. But we can do other things with that data. what we can do is we can control the animator. Now the animator is just used to control animations. Now if we look back over in the scene that we had for the course, don't save, and let's take a look at the guy. Now this little guy has a lot of different little animations. If we look over here and look in his assets, we can see all his little animations that he has. Alright, and we can look in his animator and see that it looks very familiar to Playmaker. We have these different states, and the difference is it's pretty simple. The difference here is that the events are these little arrows, and we can see here that these conditions are changed. If vertical is greater than 0, that means that he should be walking forward, right? If vertical is greater than 0, someone is pressing the up key. All right, so he should switch from an idle state to a running state. Now the difference here is that we don't really control any events that are happening inside of these states. The only thing we're doing is playing one of these animations. Say for example we switch to the walk. We can look at this arrow and see that if horizontal is less than 0, he should be doing this, turning to the left. Alright, so horizontal is less than 0, that means someone is pressing the left key or the A key. Alright, the other one, walk right, he just walks to the right a little bit. And this animation happens if horizontal is greater than 0. So if someone's pressing to the right, someone's pressing the D key. All of these are defined as the horizontal, negative, and positive buttons. Okay. Walk backwards is just the same. It's just you're looking to see if vertical is greater than -1. Alright, so let's think about this though. This doesn't read the variables from Playmaker. If we look at Playmaker, we don't really say over here, okay, well, inside of the animator, we don't look over inside of here and look for stuff that's inside of Playmaker. What we do is we have to create some parameters, and these are just the same as variables, but these variables are only going to exist inside of the animator, inside of the Mechanim Animator. We have vertical, horizontal, and I never even used pushing, so I can just delete that. So it's exactly the same. We have a vertical value and a horizontal value. Now if I hit play, let's watch how these values will change. Right now it's 0, horizontal is 0. If I press up, you can see that vertical has changed to 2.0. And that's just because I have the multiplier on for the Playmaker. Okay, you see here the multiplier is 2. And that's just to make the guy move a little bit faster. But going back to the animator, we can watch these change. And depending on what they are, we go to different animations. If I press to the right, we can see that the horizontal value changed to 2. And the vertical value will change to -2 if I press the back key. Just for comparison's sake, I'm going to go back over to the Playmaker and change this to be a 1 and a 1. So we can kind of see the difference here. Now, he's going to move. Oh, I didn't change it in the other place. So I need to change it over here too. And likewise here. Alright, so let's watch how much slower he goes. And you see why I did the multiplier of 2. Now let's look at the animator. You'll see that now it's 1 because I changed the multiplier to only just be 1. You know, it doesn't multiply by anything else. Okay. Now how do I do this? How do I make these read over in the Playmaker to be able to check these axes? Well, I don't. Inside of Playmaker, what I do is I do have set animator float. So what I can do is look inside of the animator, find this parameter, which again is just the same as a variable essentially for the purposes of this, and set that equal to whatever float is, whatever this vertical variable is. So all the time I'm going to listen for the vertical axis stored in this variable, and then take that variable, whatever it is, and send it to this parameter, so that this parameter in the animator and this value v, which is also used to move over here, is they're always going to be equal. So whatever the GetAxis horizontal returns, whether it be -1 or -0.5 or whatever it is, it's going to immediately send that value over to the animator so that it knows which animation to perform. Alright, so let's take a look at what we're talking about here. First thing we need to have in any program is some way to get some data in order to tell the application what to do. Now, this is not just for games. This is for any application you've ever used. It always waits for a touch event, or it waits for some data entry and then the enter key, something like that. So what are we actually using to get this data? Well, we're going to use Playmaker. Playmaker is going to be our data getter. It's going to always be listening for whatever data we have, and then it's going to, do whatever it needs to do, or whatever we tell it to do. So what are we actually going to do inside of Playmaker? Well, we're going to use the GetAxis function. The GetAxis function will always listen for some value for us to select. And the values, again, are defined inside of our project settings input. This is where we define these axes. Okay. So with the GetAxis function, what exactly does it do? Well, it waits for input. Let me get my little box here. The input is going to be between -1 and 1. Any kind of input, although button presses, mouse clicks, and controller movement aren't really to do with GetAxis, this is what we're talking about when we say input. So regardless of how the input is input, and yes, that is correct, it is still a number between -1 and 1. So if we press left on the controller or right on the controller, or press the A key or the D key, it's still going to be the same. So we're going to use this information, but to use it, we need to pass it to other systems. When we pass it to other systems, those systems need somewhere to store it. Okay, it's essentially like whenever you mail something from your Gmail and to your friend, they don't just read it from your Gmail. They have to have some place to store it. That's their Gmail inbox. It goes from your inbox, from your sent folder to their inbox. So then they can read it. They can do something. They can see that the meeting has been canceled or whatever. So each system needs to have some variable to store this data. Now the GetAxis inside of Playmaker, we made this variable called V, or vertical, or whatever you wanted to call it. Okay, now what we want to do is actually have this V always going to store whatever we're pressing. So it's going to be 0, -1, or 1, or some number in between. Alright, and what we're going to do with this data is now we're going to take it and not do that one. We'll say for Playmaker, we're going to actually use Playmaker and then send it to the physics system. And we're always going to constantly compare this variable to 0. 0 is no movement, and so 0 means that no key or button is being pressed. If the variable is not 0, that means something is being pressed. So then we can take that and move a character forward with the translate function. Also backward, same thing. Okay, we translate it backward if it's less than 0, and we move it forward if it's more than 0. Now, we also want to take that same data and send it to Mechanim. Alright, well, what is Mechanim? Well, Mechanim is our little animator. Alright, over here we have this animation state machine system. Depending on what these variables are, it's going to do a different animation. So it constantly checks the variable. If it's 0, play the idle animation. So it's the same thing up here. If it's 0, do nothing. Leave it in the idle position. If it's not 0, do something else. If the variable is greater than 0, play the walk or run animation. If the variable is less than 0, play the walk back animation. All right, we can look over here and see that that's what happens. We start out at the idle, and if vertical is less than 0, we go to the walk back animation. Over here. If vertical is greater than 0, we play the run animation. And we need to get back to idle, so over here we make sure we look at the vertical, and if it's less than 0.1, that means that someone has actually pressed or stopped pressing the up key. Now, why can't we do this less than 1? Well, if you remember, and if you were paying attention to this, remember that it doesn't go to 1 immediately. It takes a second. So there's the possibility comes to where it can just go over here, and then it says, oh wait, it's less than -1 already, so then it goes right back. So that is why I set it to 0.1. Okay. Now, sometimes it may work, sometimes it may not, as far as if you do less than 1. But how about we not take the chance? And we can go ahead and do it right now. Let's test it. So if I press up, see, it bounced right back. And it actually got stuck. So the best thing to do is actually set it close to 0, 0.1 or something like that. All right, let's go back to our scene. Alright, so to actually do any of these different animations, we need to have a variable to actually check. Okay? So we need to make a variable inside of Mechanim. So this has its own variable to check. This has its own variable to check. Now inside of the Mechanim system, it's called a parameter, but it functions just like a variable. So Mechanim is always going to check this variable. Depending on what it is, it'll do a different animation. Playmaker is always going to check this variable. Depending on what it is, it'll do different actions. And it's always updating this simple variable that we have over here. So we use the GetAxis function to wait for an input. Whatever that input is, we store it here. Playmaker and the physics system will always look at this variable, depending on what it is, do different actions. And it will always store it here. Depending on what this variable is, the animator will play a different animation. Alright, so that may be a little bit hard to understand, but let's go ahead and put it in practice. So what I have here is a very simple scene. The very simple characters, animated girl. I haven't tried it out yet, but I know she has some animation, so let's go ahead and give it a try. I chose this particular model because I know one of my mentees is into animated anime stuff, so that's why I chose this one. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. If we go ahead and look at this character in Playmaker, she has no FSMs. This animator isn't actually for the other character. We need to make an animator controller to actually be able to change the animations on this character. Let's say with this character I just hit play. And you'll see she just sits there. Now why does she just sit here? Well, because she's not animated. She doesn't have any animations. To give her some animations, we're going to use the animator in the Mechanim system. So let's go down here to the projects and create an animator character. Or sorry, animator controller. And we'll call this anime girl controller. Alright, so once we actually create this controller, you can see that it does change from the villager controller to the new anime girl controller. And it doesn't have anything inside of it. And we'll come back to this in a moment. Let's first get this girl to move. So with the character selected, we simply go into Playmaker, right click, add an FSM. Now, unlike the villager, I want this character to be able to move or be able to translate and rotate at the same time. Let's go ahead and take a look at exactly what kind of animations she has. Alright, she has 3 attacks apparently. Something called cute, which I don't really care about all of that. Run, run left, one right. Does she have? Okay. Walk, walk back, walk left, walk right. Let's go ahead and take a look at these. To preview these animations, you take the model that you want to use to preview it and drag it over here. Okay, why aren't you working? Oh, wait, okay, I see. Alright, so we can just go ahead and play it. Man, these people are weird. Alright, whatever. I'll go ahead and drag that model down here so we can get the material. And I find it hard to believe that if this is a metal breastplate, how these things are so bouncy. But alright. Maybe her quest is to find a better fitting bra. I do not know. But anyway, we can see her feet here, and that's what's important. And her body is actually turned in a way that makes it look like she's turning to the right. Let's take a look at walk left. And should be exactly the same thing, but mirrored over. You can see that her body is turned in such a way that it looks like she is turning to the left. This probably won't look very good with just the idle animation perspective of it, but let's just assume that it's all going to work out. I would actually use a different animation if she was actually just standing still and turning. But we don't have one of those apparently on this model, and we don't really need to go look for one to actually get the point across here. Alright, so let's look at the walk animation. She's definitely a girl on a mission. And walk back animation. And that should be enough. So we have walk, walk left, walk right, and walk back. So let's make a simple animation for this girl. Now we also need the idle, so let's take a look at what kind of idles she has. Idle A, looks like she's standing there, probably with a sword in her hand, I assume, or some weapon. Let's choose idle B and see what this is. Just kind of standing there with her hand on her hip. And idle C, looks like she's, what is she doing that's so, man, these people, I tell you what, you guys need to get a girlfriend or something. We'll go with idle B, the one without so much jiggly. Alright, so the thing to keep in mind with your animator is that the first animation that you drag in is going to be your default animation, the one that everything else links to. Now, you can always change that, but it's easier just to start out with where your character is going to, what it's going to be doing when it's just standing still, when there's no input to make any decisions. Alright, so let's go ahead and drag in idle B. We can see whenever we first come into the animator from the entry, it goes directly into idle B. Let's hit play. Oh, I didn't actually add it to the character. I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? Alright, the thing to keep in mind with these characters are that we need to actually specify which controller we're going to be using. And that's what I made over here, the anime girl controller. The thing that actually runs the animations, we need to specify that this character is going to use that. Alright, so we just grab it, drag it over here and let go. Now, conversely, you can always just choose the little circle and choose the one you want to use. Alright, so with that done, let's hit play. Now immediately we can see that the girl is using that default anim. That's weird. Why was her feet like that? Well, that's fine. That's going to have to be because she's not holding a sword and I'm not using the boobs are us animation. That's just not cool. Alright, so we have our idle animation for the girl. Now let's go and do some playmaking. Alright, so with the character selected, we have this start state. Let's do exactly what we did before with the GetAxis. And we're going to do two of them because we need to get horizontal and vertical. Now, since we're going to use the GetAxis functions, we need to have two variables. So I'll make input, or sorry, let's say vert axis float and hora axis. And my recommendation is always name your variables something that indicates what they are. So when you come back and look at them later, you can say, oh, that's what this is. Alright, so we're going to get our vertical axis and store it inside the vertical axis variable we just created, and then the horizontal axis and store it in the hora axis that we just made. Now, depending on what these are, we could make it switch states, but we don't really need to. We can do all of this all in one simple state. Say, for example, we do a translate now, and we also want to do a rotate. And what we can do is very simply always rotate in the y-axis whatever the horizontal axis currently is. So whatever this float, the horizontal float is, we're going to use that and rotate all the time. Now, why can we do this? Because if we're not actually pressing anything, it will be rotating 0. If we actually press left, then it will change and rotate that way. But if we're not pressing anything, it will then go back. This will go back to 0, which means that this will go back to 0. So this will work just fine. Likewise, we can use translate and move in the, I think I'm going to use X. And we'll do the vert axis, depending on what I think it has to be Z, but let's just check it and find out. Alright, so same thing applies. If this is 0, then we don't have to worry about it. We're just going to move in the X direction, depending on whatever it is. If it's 0, then we don't move. But if that changes, this will move in that direction. Make sure we have every frame checked, and let's hit play. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I don't want to have the X. I knew it was Z, but I was trying to outthink myself apparently. All right, so we'll change this to the vert axis, yes, and now hit play. All right, so if I press to the right, animated girl rotates. If I press up, she goes forward. If I hit back, she goes backward. If I press to the left, she turns that way. So the movement's fine. She moves in the direction that I tell her to as far as the keys. But she's not animating. She has the default animation, but that's it. So we need to make that variable on the Mechanim Animator and then look at that variable to determine exactly which animation to do. Now, since we have two distinct different movements, we have a rotate and a translate, so one going forward, one going left, one going right, one going backward, we need to have actually two variables. One for if the player is turning, one for if the player is moving forward. Now, if we play both of these animations, it should work out okay. So let's try. So let's go over to the animator and let's make those variables. And we'll make a float and we'll call this vert axis from Playmaker. And we'll make another one, float horizontal axis from Playmaker. So every frame inside of Playmaker will set those two variables to whatever these are. Alright, so we'll look into our action browser and we'll set animator, and we have lots of things to choose from here, and the only one we need is float. We need two of those. We'll be setting two floats. So on this game object, which means the Playmaker and the animator are attached to the same object, the player. So we are going to be looking for the animator on the current game object, so the owner. What parameter are we going to set? Well, we're going to set the vert axis from Playmaker, so this is the variable of that from that animator. What are we going to set it to? Well, we're going to set it to whatever vert axis is every frame. Same thing here. We're going to set the horizontal axis from Playmaker, so this variable, we're going to set it equal to whatever we're actually getting here every frame. Now, if we hit play and look over at the animator, we should see these change. Yep. So we see that this is a positive 1 if I'm pressing forward. If I press to the right, this turns into a 1. If I press up, this turns into a 1. If I press back, a -1. If I press to the left, -1. So that's working just fine. So now we can take this data and do something with it. And what we're going to do is make it switch animations. So we'll go into this girl's project animations, and the ones we decided to use, or I decided to use, will be walk right, so we'll drag that in. Walk left, oh, you stay right there. Alright, walk left, walk right, and I'm not going to worry about the walk back, I don't think. I'll just do the walk for now. No. And how you know which one to actually grab? The one that has the little play icon. That's an animation. These are meshes. Okay? So you drag the one that has the little play icon. Alright, so now we need to actually make these switch, and to move around in the animator you middle mouse click and you can move around. Okay, now we can right click and select make transition, and then we have a little drag. So we'll drag over here to walk right. Let's do this one for our test. So from idle we're going to go to walk right if certain conditions are met. The condition for walk right is going to be if, and here's where we set our conditions, and it automatically comes up with variables to check. Okay, and we only have two parameters. So if our horizontal axis, and since this is walk right, it needs to be 1 or towards 1 before it will actually play. So if the horizontal axis is greater than 0, so I'm pressing the right key, I should go to this animation. To go back, and I'll just select the other arrow. You can see how I'm going back between the two. I am going to look at the same variable, and if it's less than -0.1, that means I've stopped pressing the right key for some time. It's had time enough to wind down towards 0. Alright, so let's try this one. It's going to have a problem, and I'll point out what it is in a moment. So I press to the right, and you can see the animation, oh, now it changed. And then it just sits there for a second, and if I'm not pressing anything, it takes a minute before it goes, and I'll point it out again right now. Watch. I press to the right, the animation hasn't switched, and now when the animation finishes, then it will actually switch over to the other one. Now the reason this is that these animations have this setting, exit time. What this means is that this won't happen, this transition won't happen until this animation is completely finished playing. Now all of these animations loop, they loop around. So this says until the first, or the current iteration of this loop has actually finished, don't switch to this other animation. So what we need to do is uncheck exit time for both of these. So we're saying that this animation can interrupt this animation no matter where it is. We don't have to wait for this to finish, and we can go back to the idle animation from here without waiting for this one to finish. Let's go ahead and hit play and try this again. I'll press to the right, and she does change to that animation. And like I said, this looks a little bit goofy. This should actually be a different animation for turning from a stationary position, in my opinion. It will work fine for whenever we're walking, though. Alright, so we'll do the same thing over here. Set up our transforms or whatever, our transitions, and I'll make one back here, and now we'll set these parameters up. First thing I'll do for all of them is uncheck the exit time. In my opinion, that should be unchecked by default, but it's not. So to go to walk left, we do the exact opposite from what we did over here. If horizontal is less than 0, we go to walk left. If horizontal is greater than -0.1, we go back to idle. Let's test that one. Press to the left, and it did switch to that animation. I'll release, and it did switch back to idle. Okay. Now, to go to walk, we're going to look at the vertical, and if it's greater than 0, we'll go to walk. If it's less than 0, less than 0.1, we'll go back to idle. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll turn, then I begin walking, turn. Now watch what happens if I'm pressing up and to the right. And then I go back to forward. You see that kind of little bit of a stutter? So I'm pressing up, and then I turn to the right, and now she's still walking forward. It doesn't have the animation where she's actually turning to the right. The animation is not changing to these walk left and walk rights. The reason is I'm still pressing up. If I'm still pressing up, it's never going to leave this state until I tell it to. So these animations will not actually play if it's already walking forward. So to fix that, obviously what we need to do is make transitions over here. Now these will be more complex transitions, but not really. So if you think about it, if I'm walking forward, when should I switch to walking forward but turning right? Well, I should switch to this and not to idle if vertical is still greater than 0, that's fine, if I'm still pressing forward. But also, if horizontal is greater than 0 too. So if I'm pressing to the right and pressing up, I should switch to this transition. To get back, I do the same thing. If I look at the vertical axis, make sure it's still greater than 0. So because if it's not greater than 0, if I'm not pressing up, I should go over here. So the only way this one will trigger is if I'm still pressing forward. But also, if the horizontal axis, I want to switch from going right to just going forward, I need to actually check the horizontal axis and make sure it's less than 0.1. So if I'm still pressing forward, but I'm no longer pressing the right key at the same time, then I need to switch to forward and only forward. Let's go ahead and give it a test. So I'll press to the right, this looks fine, press forward, now it stays here, and that's fine. But whenever I switch to just forward, it switches over here. If I press to the right, she does rotate over. Ah, I see the problem. These exit times. Forgot to change those. Alright, let's try again. Rotate around, just forward. There is a problem. What is it? It's going back to the default. So what I'll do is, for the going back to idle, I'll also do a check for vertical. And if vertical is greater than 0, actually I'll do this. Only go back to idle if those are both true. And I'll go ahead and switch this one too to do the same thing. Alright, let's give it a try. Rotate's fine, go forward, okay, that's fine. Rotate again, keep going forward, rotate again, go forward, rotate again. Looks fine. So I'll duplicate this things over here. So when should I turn to the left if I'm already walking? Well, if I'm still pressing forward and I'm pressing to the left. So if the horizontal axis is less than 0, that means I'm pressing to the left. So then I will transfer over to here. Now if I'm already walking to the left, when should I rotate to, or when should I go to walk? Well, if I'm pressing forward and the horizontal, I'm no longer pressing to the left, so that means it should be greater than -0.1. So I'm no longer pressing to the left and I'm still pressing up, then I'll rotate here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and parent the camera to this character, and let's see what happens. Yeah, that's weird. Well, instead of doing that, I guess I'll have to do the Playmaker thing on that too. So with the camera, I'll do a quick Playmaker FSM on this, and I will do a smooth look at. And I will also do a position, set position. And what am I going to do here? Let's see. I get the feeling I'm doing this wrong. Let's just do the smooth look at. What am I going to do? I'll always look at the character. Alright. Yeah, that's what I thought. I'll uncheck the keep vertical. Alright, so she walks forward, she rotates. Now she moves back to just going forward. She rotates. There's something wrong. And I already know what it is. Obviously. Every time. Alright, rotate to the right, forward, stop. Rotate to the left, forward, stop. Alright. Let's try just turning to the left and then pressing forward. Yep, that works too. Alright, excellent. So let's save this scene as Anim Girl, and I'm done. And we'll go back to something more recognizable. Alright, so the next book section is going to be covering more Playmaker stuff in depth. For this, I wanted to understand that what we need to do inside of Playmaker is not only do our functionality, but to forward information to the animator, to be able to control which animations are currently being played on the character. Now, if we don't do that, it's very easy to see that there's not a lot of visual appeal in the games. But this is a quick run through of how to actually do that. So if you're in my course, instructions with what to do with this will follow. If you're not in my course, thanks for your time. Well, if you're in my course, thanks for your time as well, obviously. But the ones that aren't in my course will not have to do the homework. All right. So that's it for this. Good night, good evening, good morning, whatever it is for you. And if you're in my course, I'll see you there. Bye.